Even the first one, when it was like, we didn't really put it out there because we were just seeing how it would go. She said,
Now, a WFSB Plus original. This is the I-Team Stream.
good afternoon and welcome to the I-Team Stream. I'm WFSB consumer investigative reporter Cassidy Williams.
And I'm Chief Investigative Reporter Sam Smink. Today we're digging into a key question that came up following the arrest of Kimberly Sullivan.
Yes, Sullivan is the Waterbury woman accused of keeping her stepson captive in her home from the time he was a child until just this year. That's nearly 20 years.
So many of you reached out to us wondering how this stepson could have been taken out of his school, never to be seen again. How did this happen? As we started digging, we found there are no state laws that say anyone has to follow up. This is Samantha Santilli, second year teaching from home. Her students are her sons, 5-year-old Logan and 3-year-old Ronan.
Because there's how many months in the year, honey? 12.
Santilli and her husband made the decision to homeschool shortly after Logan started preschool.
He is a insanely special boy. He is autistic. He also has ADHD and OCD. And we just quickly learned that the Waterbury public school system wasn't the correct fit for him.
The family hasn't looked back.
We're doing first and second grade math right now, and he's 5. And his brother's doing kindergarten math, and he's 3.
Santilli doesn't have to answer to anyone but herself, and she doesn't think that needs to change.
I'm just trying to do the best that I can for my child.
The case of the Waterbury woman arrested for keeping her stepson captive is raising questions that lawmakers and fellow parents want answered. In that situation, the now 32-year-old survivor told police he was permanently pulled out of school in 2005 while in the 4th grade after DCF visited the home twice, following concerns from his elementary school staff. The only documented follow-up appears to be a police visit in April 2005 at the request of DCF. According to this report, the boy's former classmates called DCF with concerns the boy may have died because he had been out of school so long. That same report shows someone whose name is blacked out told police the boy was being homeschooled by his stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, although there are no other records to suggest that. Police say in the report they found the boy to be healthy and happy after speaking with him.
This is a particular instance of monsters who did a terrible thing to a child, and I think a lot of adults failed that child. I don't think that means now, though, I should be checking in regularly and that somebody needs to come into my home and disrupt my children and my life.
The I-Team found currently there are no homeschooling regulations in Connecticut or any system in place to monitor students once they are removed from school for any reason. There is a statute that requires that parents be able to show that the child is receiving equivalent instruction elsewhere, but nothing that explains how the state can or does enforce it. Christina Guillo, the state's acting child advocate, says we need something.
The issue is not with homeschooling. The issue is with the reality that there are parents who take advantage of our lack of regulation to hide their children.
It's an issue that's come up before, following the death of Matthew Torado. Torado's mom was convicted of starving the nonverbal autistic 17-year-old in 2017 after years of abuse and neglect. A 2018 Office of the Child Advocate report looked at 380 homeschool kids from 6 school districts in Connecticut and compared them with DCF records.
More than a third of those children who had been removed for the stated purpose of homeschooling had at least one prior report to DCF.
The I-Team found state policy does not require parents with current or past cases with DCF to notify them of homeschooling, so they don't always know it's happening. And in many cases, a school may not even know DCF ever investigated a family.
Those are the kids we worry about, and truly, those are the kids that I worry about.
What is concerning is when a child is taken out and we don't know what the outcomes are. We don't.
Fran Rabinowitz is the executive director for the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. She says the state doesn't even require parents to formally tell schools they are homeschooling their children, only recommends it. Though without notice, a child can be considered truant after 10 unexcused absences in a year or 4 unexcused in a month, allowing the school to investigate and potentially get the courts involved. Rabinowitz says there are several groups, including hers, working on legislation that would require a more formal process.
We would just like to have a document that says I'm homeschooling my child according to the state standards. And then we would like a 1-year check-in where they come in and take the SBAC test. If they wish to take another test, that it's done by a third party.
It's not that simple, Samantha Santilli says.
The idea that I need to be reporting back to the school system, well, then I would have kept my son in school if I wanted to report back to the school system.
Santilli shares the same concern that many homeschooling groups tell us they have, that they are coming under scrutiny for cases that have nothing to do with them. Despite at least 2 documented visits to the home, DCF did not find abuse or neglect in the case of Kimberly Sullivan's stepson. In Toronto's case, no one in the state saw Matthew for more than a year before his death because his mom did not send him to school, denied access to her home, and ignored orders to appear in court. Despite that, DCF asked to close the case, and a judge granted that petition. Guillot agrees that we should be looking at all parts of the problem.
Because at the investigation stage, there are not a lot of tools for DCF if the parent simply refuses to cooperate. On the other side of that, we need to grapple with the issue that parents can just go to school, say, I'm going to homeschool my child, and there's no follow-up whatsoever. None.
Ronan, you want to write your name on the board?
Santilli just wants to keep her independence.
I think there's other things that are being missed in order to blame something else.
Since news of the Waterbury case broke, lawmakers have proposed several fixes. Tomorrow, we hear from lawmakers on both sides of the debate and where the state goes from here. Your chief investigative reporter, Sam Smink, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
All right, so let's talk about kind of what lawmakers have been saying. You know, everyone has heard about this case.
Every lawmaker we talked to said their goal is to make sure this doesn't happen again. Now, some lawmakers do want to specifically focus on homeschooling regulations and getting their eyes on kids at least once a year. And a lot of them say that's really the goal. They're not necessarily trying to say this is what you have to teach your child, but they just want to be able to get their eyes on the children, especially in cases where DCF has been involved, even if those cases have been closed. Because we saw in the Toronto case, although he himself was not homeschooled, he was just not put into school for more than 100 days. His mother ended up taking his sister out to homeschool, and there were active DCF cases going on, and that should have automatically triggered an investigation, and it just didn't. But we have other lawmakers that say this is not about homeschooling. We need to be looking at DCF because we do know in the Kimberly Sullivan case that DCF had at least 2 visits to the home per the survivor in this story, and they did nothing. Now, granted, he said Kimberly Sullivan told him to tell them everything was fine, but we really don't know what DCF thought because we haven't had a chance to look at the records yet. And a lot of lawmakers have also told us they want to look at DCF and whether they can do something to make sure that somebody is not in the same position as the survivor.
And the legislature is active right now. They're in session. Is there an actual bill being proposed or talk about, or is this just ideas right now?
This is just ideas. There's no bills going on right now. One of the lawmakers we talked to said they've kind of passed their deadline to create bills right now. So a lot of it is just talking, but they're still hoping to potentially get a public hearing in before the end of the session. If not, they can maybe do it before the next session starts if they want to call something special. I think a lot of them are waiting to see what they can get from DCF records, because originally DCF told us they had no records related to this case, and then they went back and looked at their archives and said they did find some records, but none of the lawmakers I've spoken to, including ones that represent Waterbury, have been able to look at those records yet.
Do we have any idea when those might be available?
We don't. I know that the Office of the Child Advocate is doing a preliminary investigation. Now, full investigations from the Office of the Child Advocate typically take a year or more, but a preliminary investigation, that could maybe take 6 months. We're already about 1.5 months out from when we first learned of this case, so we could see something in the next couple months.
And the woman in your story, she represents one homeschooling mom speaking for herself, but I know you also talked to a lot of homeschooling groups who maybe didn't want to talk on camera, but had a lot of things to say about this.
They really did. And the reason I think Samantha was so great is because she really did articulate a lot of what other homeschooling groups feel. They really feel this is not about homeschooling, and they feel that this case is being used to potentially put regulations onto something that hasn't been regulated before. They bring up the fact in the Tirado case back in 2019, Governor Lamont had actually tried to pass something that would require homeschooling parents to bring their children to a school district at least once a year. That ended up failing due to a lot of opposition. And in that case, they were right. Tirado was not homeschooled. Matthew Tirado himself was not homeschooled. In that case, he was what would be considered truant. His mother kept him out of school for 100 days, and more than 100 days, really. And the Office of the Child Advocate found that DCF failed in that case. The school district failed in that case. The systems that we have in place failed in that case. So they're right. That wasn't just about homeschooling. And in this case, their big argument is we really have nothing to show that she did take him out of school for the specific purpose of homeschooling. We know in her arrest warrant, the survivor told police that he was pulled out of school after the 2 DCF visits. So it alludes to the fact that she took him out because DCF kept being called. The school staff kept calling DCF because they were really worried. And we only have that one piece of paper, that police report, that says someone, and again, we don't know because the name is blacked out, said they believed that Kimberly Sullivan was homeschooling him. He said in the arrest report, he told police that he maybe for a week got a few books from his stepmom, and that was about it. So he actually was never schooled. And we don't know, because we have not been able to see any records, whether anything was filed with the school district officially to say whether he was being transferred to another school or if he was being homeschooled. But again, you don't even actually have to file something with the school if you don't. Although if you don't file a letter saying that you are withdrawing your child for homeschooling, they could investigate you for potentially being truant.
At the end of the day, no one was checking in on this kid to see what happened for 20 years. So this idea that Governor Lamont even tried to pass that homeschooled kids would have to check in, does that exist anywhere else? Would that be a first of its kind thing, or was he modeling that after other states?
No, he was modeling that after multiple states. In fact, Connecticut and Texas are on the same spectrum when it comes to regulations, which is that they essentially have none. But our neighboring states like New York and Massachusetts are actually really, really strict. Massachusetts and New York really require lesson plans that they feel homeschooling parents need to follow, and they make sure that that's happening. They test them. So it's not only getting their eyes on the child. Like you did hear Fran Rabinowitz, who is in charge of the public school superintendent, she'd like to see some testing. I don't know, based on the conversations I've had with homeschooling groups, that would ever get anywhere. And again, in 2019, all they tried to do is suggest kids would show up at least once a year and could potentially show a portfolio. That right now is recommended as well, but again, it's not required. All of the laws in Connecticut are just recommended. They're not required at all. And the State Department of Education says those laws haven't changed in 20 to 25 years. Fran Rabinowitz said she's not trying to be as strict as New York. She's not trying to be as strict as Massachusetts. It's really just about getting their eyes on the children, especially, as Christina Guillo, the interim child advocate, said, the ones that have the DCF cases. For her, that was a big sticking point. She said after, her predecessor did that investigation in 2018, to find that there were so many children being pulled out of school for the specific reason to hide them, and no one was looking up after them. She just says that's unacceptable, and she feels that we need to do something.
So it seems like a lot of people are talking about it. No bill's actually been proposed. Where on your end, where does the investigation go from here? What questions do you still want answered?
I still want to know more about what DCF had in their records. I want to know more about what the school district had in their records. We've heard a lot of talk at the legislature based on people they've talked to in the school system that have said that they called DCF multiple times. They still kept calling even when he was taken out of school. We don't know. We don't know specifically. We just know from that survivor's story that DCF came to the home at least twice, because then he was taken out of school. This is what he told police. And then that police came to the house at least twice. Once at the request of DCF because they got calls from some of the students that went to school with him, and another because Kimberly Sullivan actually called and said she wanted to file something against DCF because she kept being harassed. We are continuing to look into this. This is not just, hey, we've looked into this part of the case. We are looking into what DCF did or didn't do, and as you heard Christina Guillo say, and as we explored, there's not a lot DCF can do when a parent just says, hey, I don't want you in my house, bye. We did learn from DCF that they can get a court involved, but they'd have to have a lot of evidence to prove that abuse and neglect is going on before they can get past that door. And Christina Guillo says she'd like the legislature to possibly look at those kinds of things, because right now, Kimberly Sullivan, we also heard, and I didn't mention this in the story before, but, a week after when we were reporting on her arrest, I actually talked to, it was a great uncle, or it would have been the boy's great uncle, and he said that his wife, who has since passed away, also called DCF on the family when she was up there for a funeral visiting her brother, who was his father, the survivor's father, who passed away in January 2024. And according to what DCF, or this woman says she told her husband, DCF was not allowed in the door, and that was that. So Christina Guillo says we really need to take a hard look at that.
Yeah, this one case, Kimberly Sullivan claims she's innocent, but just the conversation has sparked a lot of different issues that maybe Connecticut needs to look at.
I think they really do. Some things did change after the Tirado case, very little actually, but there was one thing at the time, as I mentioned, the survivor told police that Kimberly Sullivan told him when he was talking to DCF to say that everything was fine. There were a lot of questions over whether you can interview children without their parents present, so that you might not have that influence. And before the Tirado case, it was only allowed in certain cases where abuse was suspected, but then after that, the legislator allowed it to be abuse and neglect suspected. So it's a small change, but it allowed a little bit more of a chance. But again, there's a high precipice that DCF needs to meet to get that kind of interview.
Yeah, a lot more to look into on this story for sure. That is our iTeam stream for today. If you ever have a story that you want either one of us to look into, please go to WFSB.com. You click on the iTeam tab, and then there's a form for contact the iTeam. We do our best to get back to everyone and try to look into things, but thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if you have any tips about this case or you want me to look into more, let me know. Have a good day, everyone.